Yeah, I'm just gonna pour it while we're on here. Might as well, right? Yes, I see all of your hearts, Angie. Don't mind me. I'm gonna need another bottle. I've drank this much already. What is this gonna be, like 1 bottle per book? Maybe? Okay. Who else is watching? Angie's watching. God. That's a good one. Man, those people in their water. I feel so bad for them. I'm just gonna give it a couple more minutes. We'll see who else shows up. Oh my goodness. Stretch. Don't mind me. I'm just stretching on your TV. I'm very excited. So hopefully I should be getting new stuff in the mail tomorrow. Maybe my boobs won't hurt so much. Oh, now we have 2 viewers. I don't know who else is here. And I just took a nap, so like I'm rearing and ready to go. I should be good. I got it at Walmart. I have it in black too. Hey Leah. We're getting ready to read Harry Potter. Oh, we have 6 viewers now. Should I just start? And Katie. Katie, we're getting ready to read. You're getting here right at the beginning. Well, the beginning of these chapters. Not the beginning of the book. We're almost halfway through it. Hey, pretty lady. Okay. Let's move you. There we go. I have you guys like balanced on a little table right now. There we go. And I prop my book up against it because this one's a little bigger than a normal book. God, I love this book. All right, are we ready? So we are starting chapter 7, Mudbloods and Murmers. You're at the drive-thru? All right, Mudbloods and Murmers. I'm pretty sure that's a piece of lettuce and, you know, a slug. I will do my best not to drop you guys, I swear. Okay. So chapter 7. Throw some whiskey down my throat. I'm the whiskey drinking Harry Potter reader. Let's do this. Harry spent a lot of time over the next few days dodging out of sight whenever he saw Gilderoy Lockhart coming down the corridor. Harder to avoid was Colin Creevey, who seemed to have memorized Harry's timetable. Nothing seemed to give Colin a bigger thrill than to say, "All right, Harry?" 6 or 7 times a day, or hear, "Hello, Colin," back. However exasperated Harry sounded, nothing gave Colin a bigger thrill than to say, "All right, Harry," 6 or 7 times a day, and hear, "Hello, Colin," back. However exasperated Harry sounded when he said it. Hedwig was still angry with Harry about the disastrous car journey, and Ron's wand was still malfunctioning, surpassing itself on Friday morning by shooting out of Ron's hand in charms and hitting tiny old Professor Flitwick squarely between the eyes, creating a large, throbbing green boil where it had struck. Ugh. So, with one thing and another, Harry was quite glad to reach the weekend. He, Ron, and Hermione were planning to visit Hagrid on Saturday morning. Harry, however, was shaken awake several hours earlier than he would have liked by Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. "What's the matter?" said Harry groggily. "Quidditch practice," said Wood. "Come on." Harry squinted at the window. There was a thin mist hanging across the pink-gold sky. Now he was awake. He couldn't understand how he could have slept through the racket the birds were making. "Oliver," Harry croaked, "it's the crack of dawn." "Exactly," said Wood. He was a tall, burly sixth-year, and at that moment his eyes were gleaming with mad enthusiasm. "It's part of our new training program. Come on, grab your broom and let's go," said Wood heartily. "None of the other teams have started training yet. We're going to be the first on the mark this year." Yawning and shivering slightly, Harry climbed out of bed and tried to find his Quidditch robes. "Good man," said Wood. Meet you on the pitch in 15 minutes. When he'd found his scarlet team robes and pulled on his cloak for warmth, Harry scribbled a note to Ron explaining where he'd gone and went down the spiral staircase to the common room, his Nimbus 2000 on his shoulder. He had just reached the portrait hole when there was a clatter behind him and Colin Creevey came dashing down the spiral staircase, his camera swinging madly around his neck and something clutched in his hand. "I heard someone say your name on the stairs, Harry. Oh, look what I've got here. I've had it developed. I wanted to show you." Harry, looking bemused at the photograph Colin was brandishing under his nose. A moving black and white Lockhart was tugging hard on the arm Harry recognized as his own. He was pleased to see that his photographic self was putting up a good fight and refusing to be dragged into view. As Harry watched, Lockhart gave up and slumped, panting against the white edge of the picture. "Will you sign it?" said Colin eagerly. "No," said Harry flatly, glancing around to check that the room was really deserted. "Sorry, Colin. I'm in a hurry. Quidditch practice." Thank you, Auntie Umber. He climbed through the portrait hole. "Oh, wow, wait for me! I've never watched a Quidditch match before!" Colin scrambled through the hole after him. "It's really boring," Harry said quickly. But Colin ignored him, his face shining with excitement. "You were the youngest house player in 100 years, weren't you, Harry? Weren't you?" said Colin, trotting alongside him. "You must be brilliant. I've never flown. Is it easy? Is that your own broom? Is that the best one there is?" Harry didn't know how to get rid of him. It was like having an extremely talkative shadow, or like having a sibling. I don't really understand Quidditch," said Colin breathlessly. "Is it true that there are 4 balls? 2 of them fly around trying to knock people off their brooms?" "Yes," said Harry heavily, resigned to explaining the complicated rules of Quidditch. "They're called bludgers. There are 2 beaters on each team who carry clubs to beat the bludgers away from their side. Fred and George Weasley are the Gryffindor beaters." "And what are the other balls for?" Colin asked, tripping down a couple of steps because he was gazing open-mouthed at Harry. "Well, the quaffle, that's the biggish red one, is the one that scores goals. 3 chasers on each team throw the quaffle to each other to try to get it through the goalposts at the end of the pitch. They're 3 long poles with hoops on the end. You're not too late, Capri, we've only just started." "And the 4th ball?" "Is the golden snitch," said Harry, "and it's very small, very fast, and difficult to catch. That's what the Seeker's got to do, because a game of Quidditch doesn't end until the snitch has been caught. And whichever team Seeker gets the snitch earns his team an extra 150 points. "And you're the Gryffindor Seeker, aren't you?" said Colin in awe. "Yes," said Harry, as they left the castle and started across the dew-drenched grass. "And there's the keeper, too. He guards the goalposts. That's it, really." But Colin didn't stop questioning Harry all the way down the sloping lawns to the Quidditch pitch, and Harry only shook him off when he reached the changing rooms. Colin called after him in a piping voice, "I'll go and get a good seat, Harry," and hurried off to the stands. The rest of the Gryffindor team were already in the changing room. Wood was the only person who looked truly awake. Fred and George were sitting puffy-eyed and tousle-haired next to 4th-year Alicia Spinnet, who seemed to be nodding off against the wall behind her. Her fellow chasers, Katie Bell and Angelina Johnson, were yawning side by side opposite them. "There you are, Harry. What kept you?" said Wood briskly. "Now, I want a quick talk with all of you before we actually get onto the pitch, because I've spent the summer devising a whole new training program, which I really think will make all the difference." Wood was holding up a large diorama of a Quidditch pitch, on which were drawn many lines, arrows, and crosses in different colored inks. He took out his wand, tapped the board, and the arrows began to wobble along the diagram like caterpillars. As Wood launched into a speech about his new tactics, Fred Weasley's head dropped right onto Angelina Spinnet's shoulder, and he began to snore. The first board took nearly 20 minutes to explain, but there was another board under that, and a third under that. Harry sunk into a stupor as Wood droned on and on. "So," said Wood, at long last, jerking Harry from a wistful fantasy about what he could be eating for breakfast at this very moment up at the castle. "Is that clear? Any questions?" "I've got a question, Wood," said George, who woke with a start. "Why couldn't you have told this yesterday when we were awake?" Wood wasn't pleased. "Now listen here, you lot," he said, glowering at them. "We should have won the Quidditch Cup last year. We're easily the best team, but unfortunately, owing to circumstances beyond our control—" Harry shifted guiltily in his seat. He had been unconscious in the hospital wing for the final match of the previous year, meaning that Gryffindor had been a player short and had suffered their worst defeat in 300 years. Wood took a moment to regain control of himself. Their last defeat was clearly still torturing him. "So this year we'll train harder than ever before. Okay, let's go. And let's go put our new theories into practice," Wood shouted, seizing his broomstick and leading the way out of the changing rooms. Stiff-legged and still yawning, his team followed. They had been in the changing room so long that the sun was up properly now, although remnants of mist hung over the grass in the stadium. As Harry walked onto the pitch, he saw Ron and Hermione sitting in the stands. "Aren't you finished yet?" called Ron incredulously. "Haven't even started," said Harry, looking jealously at the toast and marmalade Ron and Hermione had brought out of the Great Hall. "Wood's been teaching us new moves." He mounted his broomstick and kicked off the ground, soaring up into the air. The cool morning air whipped his face, waking him far more efficiently than Wood's long talk. It felt wonderful to be back on the Quidditch pitch. He soared right around the stadium at full speed, racing Fred and George. "What's that funny clicking noise?" called Fred as they hurtled around the corner. Harry looked into the stands. Colin was sitting on one of the highest seats, his camera raised, taking picture after picture. The sound strangely magnified in the deserted stadium. "Hi, John." "Look this way, Harry, this way," he called shrilly. "Who's that?" said Fred. "No idea," Harry lied, putting on a spurt of speed that took him as far away as possible from Colin. "What's going on?" said Wood, frowning, as he skimmed through the air towards them. Why is that first year taking pictures? I don't like it. He could be a Slytherin spy, trying to find out about our new training program." "He's in Gryffindor," said Harry quickly. "And the Slytherins don't need a spy, Oliver," said George. "What makes you say that?" said Wood testily. "Because they're here in person," said George, pointing. Several people in green robes were walking onto the pitch, broomsticks in their hands. "I don't believe it," Wood hissed in outrage. "I booked the pitch for today. We'll see about this." Wood shot towards the ground, landing rather harder than he meant to in his anger, staggering slightly as he dismounted. Harry, Fred, and George followed. "Flint!" Wood bellowed at the Slytherin captain. "This is our practice time. We've got it special. You clear off now." Marcus Flint was even larger than Wood. He had a look of trollish cunning on his face as he replied, "Plenty of room for all of us, Wood." Angelina, Alicia, and Katie all came over too. There were no girls on the Slytherin team, who stood shoulder to shoulder facing the Gryffindors, leering to a man. That's a weird sentence. "But I booked the pitch," said Wood, positively spitting with rage. "I booked it!" "Ah," said Flint, "but I've got a special note signed here from Professor Snape. I, Professor S. Snape, give the Slytherin team permission to practice today on the Quidditch pitch owing to the need to train their new seeker." "You've got a new seeker?" said Wood, distracted. "Where?" And from behind the 6 large figures before them came a 7th, smaller boy, smirking all over his pale, pointed face. It was Draco Malfoy. "Aren't you Lucius Malfoy's son?" said Fred, looking at Draco with dislike. "Funny you should mention Draco's father," said Flint, as the whole Slytherin team smiled still more broadly. "Let me show you the generous gift he's made to the Slytherin team." All 7 of them held out their broomsticks. 7 highly polished, brand new handles and 7 sets of fine gold letters spelling the words Nimbus 2001, gleaming under the Gryffindors' noses in the early morning sun. The very latest models only came out last month, said Flint carelessly, flicking a speck of dust from the end of his own. I believe it outstripes the old 2000 series by a considerable amount. As for the old clean sweeps, he smiled nastily at Fred and George, who were both clutching clean sweep 5s, sweeps the board with them. None of the Gryffindor team could think of anything to say for a moment. Malfoy was smirking so broadly his cold eyes were reduced to slits. Oh, look, said Flint, a pitch invasion. Ron and Hermione were crossing the grass to see what was going on. What's happening? Ron asked Harry. Why aren't you playing? What's he doing here? He was looking at Malfoy, taking in his Slytherin Quidditch robes. I'm the new Slytherin Seeker, Weasley, said Malfoy smugly. Everyone's just been admiring the brooms my father bought our team. Ron gaped, open-mouthed, at the 7 superb broomsticks in front of him. Good, aren't they? Said Malfoy smoothly. But perhaps the Gryffindor team will be able to raise some gold and get new brooms, too. You can raffle off those clean sweep 5s. I expect a museum would bid for them. The Slytherin team howled with laughter. Psh, at least no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in, said Hermione sharply. They got in on talent. The smug look on Malfoy's face flickered. No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood, he spat. Harry knew at once that Malfoy had said something really bad, because there was an instant uproar at his words. Flint had to dive in front of Malfoy to stop Fred and George from jumping on him. Alicia shrieked, How dare you! And Ron plunged his hand into his robes, pulled out of his wand, yelling, You'll pay for that one, Malfoy! And pointed it furiously under Flint's arm at Malfoy's face. A loud bang echoed around the stadium, and a jet of green light shot out of the wrong end of Ron's wand, hitting him in the stomach and sending him reeling backwards onto the grass. Ron! Are you all right? Squealed Hermione. Ron opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he gave an almighty belch, and several slugs dribbled out of his mouth into his lap. The Slytherin team were paralyzed with laughter. Flint was doubled over, hanging onto his new broomstick for support. Malfoy was on all fours, banging the ground with his fist. The Gryffindors were gathered around Ron, who kept belching large, glistening slugs. Nobody seemed to want to touch him. Oh, we better get him to Hagrid's, it's nearest, said Harry to Hermione, who nodded bravely, and the pair of them pulled Ron up by his arms. What happened, Harry? What happened? Is he ill? But you can cure him, can't you? Colin had run down from his seat and was now dancing alongside them as they left the pitch. Ron gave a huge heave and more slugs dribbled down his front. Oh, said Colin, fascinated and raising his camera. Can you hold him still, Harry? Get out of the way, Colin, said Harry angrily. He and Hermione supported Ron out of the stadium and across the grounds towards the edge of the forest. Nearly there, Ron, said Hermione as the gamekeeper's cabin came into view. You'll be all right in a minute. Almost there. They were within 20 feet of Hagrid's house when the front door opened. But it wasn't Hagrid who emerged. Gilderoy Lockhart, wearing robes of palest mauve today, came striding out. Quick, behind here, Harry hissed, dragging Ron behind a nearby bush. Hermione followed somewhat reluctantly. It's a simple matter if you know what you're doing, Lockhart was saying loudly to Hagrid. If you need help, you know where I am. I'll let you have a copy of my book. I'm surprised you haven't got one. I'll sign one tonight and send it over. Well, goodbye. And he strode away towards the castle. Harry waited until Lockhart was out of sight and then pulled Ron out of the bush and up to Hagrid's front door. They knocked urgently. Hagrid appeared at once, looking very grumpy, but his expression brightened when he saw who it was. Ah, Been wondering when you'd come to see me. Come in, come in. Thought you might have been Professor Lockhart again. Harry and Hermione supported Ron over the threshold into the one-room cabin, which had an enormous bed in one corner, a fire crackling merrily in another. Hagrid didn't seem perturbed by Ron's slug problem, which Harry hastily explained as he lowered Ron into a chair. Better out than in, he said cheerfully, plunking a large copper basin in front of him. Get 'em all up, Ron. I don't think there's anything to do except wait for it to stop, said Hermione anxiously, watching Ron bend over the basin. That's a difficult curse to work at the best of times, but with a broken wand... He's vomiting slugs. Ugh. Hagrid was bustling around making them tea. His boarhound, Fang, was slobbering all over Harry. What did Lockhart want with you, Hagrid? Harry asked, scratching Fang's ears. Oh, giving me advice on getting kelpies out of a well, growled Hagrid, moving a half-plucked rooster off his scrubbed table and setting down the teapot. Like I don't know how, and banging on about some banshee he banished, and... If one word of it's true, I'll eat my kettle. It was most unlike Hagrid to criticize a Hogwarts teacher, and Harry looked at him in surprise. Hermione, however, said in a voice somewhat higher than usual, I think you're being a bit unfair. Professor Dumbledore obviously thought he was the best man for the job. He was the only man for the job, said Hagrid, offering them a plate of treacle toffee, while Ron coughed squelchily into his basin. And I mean the only one. Better? And I mean the only one. Getting very difficult to find anyone for the dark arts job. People aren't too keen to take up on it, you see. They're starting to think it's jinxed. No one's lasted for a while now. So tell me, said Hagrid, jerking his head at Ron. Who is he trying to curse? Oh, Malfoy called Hermione something. It must have been really bad because everyone went mad. It was bad, said Ron hoarsely, emerging over the table looking pale and sweaty. You're welcome. Malfoy called her Mudblood, Hagrid. Ron dived out of sight again as a fresh wave of slugs made their appearance. Hagrid looked outraged. He didn't, he growled at Hermione. He did, she said, but I don't know what it means. I could tell it was very rude, of course. It's about the most insulting thing he could think of, gasped Ron, coming back up. Mudblood is a really foul name for someone who was muggle-born, you know, non-magic parents. There are some wizards, like Malfoy's family, who think they're better than everyone else because they're what people call pure blood. He gave a small burp and a single slug fell into his outstretched hand. He threw it into the basin and continued. I mean, the rest of us know it doesn't make any difference at all. Look at Neville Longbottom. He's pure blood and he can hardly stand a cauldron the right way up. And they haven't invented a spell here our Hermione can't do, said Hagrid proudly, making Hermione go a brilliant shade of magenta. It's a disgusting thing to call someone, said Ron, wiping his sweaty brow with a shaking hand. Dirty blood, see? Common blood. It's mad. Most wizards these days are half-blood anyway. If we hadn't married muggles, we'd have died out. He retched and ducked out of sight again. Well, I don't blame you for trying to curse him, Ron, said Hagrid loudly over the thuds of more slugs hitting the basin. But maybe it was a good thing your wand backfired. 'Spect Lucius Malfoy would have come marching up to the school if you'd cursed his son. Least you're not in trouble. Harry would have pointed out that trouble didn't come much worse than having slugs pouring out of your mouth, but he couldn't. Harry's treacle toffee had cemented his jaws together. Harry, said Hagrid suddenly, as though struck by a sudden thought, Got a bone to pick with you. I heard you've been giving out signed photos. How come I haven't got one? Furious, Harry wrenched his teeth apart. I am not giving out signed photos, he said hotly. If Lockhart's still putting that about... But then he saw that Hagrid was laughing. I'm only joking, he said, patting Harry genially on the back and sending him face first into the table. I know you hadn't really. I told Lockhart you didn't need to. You're more famous than him without trying. Bet he didn't like that, said Harry, sitting up and rubbing his chin. I don't think he did, said Hagrid, his eyes twinkling. And then I told him I'd never read one of his books, and he decided to go. Treacle toffee, Ron? He added, as Ron reappeared. No thanks, said Ron. Better not risk it. Come on, see what I've been growing, said Hagrid, as Harry and Hermione finished the last of their tea. It was a small vegetable patch behind Hagrid's house where a dozen of the largest pumpkins In the small vegetable patch behind Hagrid's house were a dozen of the largest pumpkins Harry had ever seen. Each was the size of a large boulder. Getting on well, aren't they? Said Hagrid happily. For the Halloween feast. Just should be big enough by then. Been feeding them, said Harry. Hagrid looked over his shoulder to check that they were alone. Well, I've been giving them, a little help. Harry noticed Hagrid's flowery pink umbrella leaning against the back wall of his cabin. Harry had had reason to believe before now that this umbrella was not all it looked. In fact, he had the strong impression that Hagrid's old school wand was concealed inside it. Hagrid wasn't supposed to use magic. He had been expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year. But Harry had found out why. But Harry had never found out why. Any mention of the matter, and Hagrid would clear his throat loudly and become mysteriously deaf until the subject was changed. An engorgement charm, I suppose, said Hermione, halfway between disapproval and amusement. Well, you've done a good job on them. And that's what your little sister said Hagrid, nodding at Ron. Met her just yesterday. Hagrid looked sideways at Harry, his beard twitching. Said she was just looking around the grounds, but I reckon she was hoping she might run into someone at my house. He winked at Harry. If you ask me, she wouldn't say no to a signed... Oh, shut up, said Harry. Ron snorted with laughter, and then the ground was sprayed with slugs. Watch it, Hagrid roared, pulling Ron away from his precious pumpkins. It was nearly lunchtime, and as Harry had only had one bit of treacle toffee since dawn, he was keen on getting back to the school to eat. They said goodbye to Hagrid and walked back up to the castle, Ron hiccuping occasionally, but only bringing up 2 very small slugs. They had barely set foot in the cool entrance hall when a voice rang out. There you are! Potter! Weasley! Professor McGonagall was walking towards them, looking stern. You will both be doing your detentions this afternoon. What are we doing, Professor? Said Ron, nervously suppressing a burp. You will be polishing the silver in the trophy room with Mr. Filch, said Professor McGonagall. No magic, Weasley. Elbow grease. Ron gulped. Argus Filch, the caretaker, was loathed by every student in the school. And you, Potter, will be helping Professor Lockhart answer his fan mail, said Professor McGonagall. Oh no, can I go and do the trophy room too? Said Harry desperately. Certainly not, said Professor McGonagall, raising her eyebrows. Professor Lockhart requested you particularly. 8 o'clock sharp, both of you. Harry and Ron slouched into the great hall in states of deepest gloom. Hermione was behind them, wearing a, well, you did break the school rules sort of expression. Harry didn't fancy his shepherd's pie as much as he thought. Shepherd's pie. Does sound good. Both he and Ron felt that they'd got the worst deal. Filch will have me there all night, said Ron heavily. No magic? There must be about 100 cups in that room. I'm no good at muggle cleaning. I'll swap any time, said Harry hollowly. I've had loads of practice with the Dursleys. Answering Lockhart's fan mail? He'll be a nightmare. Saturday afternoon seemed to melt away, and in what seemed like no time, it was 5 minutes to 8, and Harry was dragging his feet along the second-floor corridor to Lockhart's office. He gritted his teeth and knocked. The door flew open at once. Lockhart beamed down at him. "Ah, here's the scallywag," he said. "Come in, Harry, come in." Shining brightly on the walls by the light of many candles were countless framed photographs of Lockhart. He had even signed a few of them. Another large pile lay on his desk. "You can address the envelopes," Lockhart told Harry, as though this was a huge treat. "This one's to Gladys Gudgeon. Bless her, huge fan of mine." The minutes snailed by. Harry let Lockhart's voice wash over him, occasionally saying, right, and yeah. Now, when he caught a phrase like, "Fame's a fickle friend, Harry," or "celebrity is as celebrity does," remember that. The candles burned lower and lower, making the light dance over the many moving faces of Lockhart watching him. Harry moved his aching hand over what felt like the 1,000th envelope, writing out Veronica Smethly's address. It must be nearly time to leave, Harry thought miserably. Please let it be nearly time. And then he heard something. Something quite apart from the spitting of the dying candles and Lockhart's prattle about his fans. It was a voice. A voice to chill the bone marrow. A voice of breathtaking ice-cold venom. Let's see if I can do this. Come to me. Let me rip you. Let me tear you. Let me kill you. Harry gave a huge jump, and a large lilac blot appeared on Veronica Smethly's street. "What?" he said loudly. "I know," said Lockhart. 6 solid months on the top of the bestseller list. Broke all the records. "No," said Harry frantically. "The voice." "Sorry?" said Lockhart, looking puzzled. "What voice?" That voice said, "Didn't you hear it?" Lockhart was looking at Harry in high astonishment. "What are you talking about, Harry? Perhaps you're getting a little drowsy." "Oh, great Scott, look at the time! We've been here nearly 4 hours. I'd never have believed it. The time's flown, hasn't it?" Harry didn't answer. He was straining his ears to hear the voice again, but there was no sound now except for Lockhart telling him he mustn't expect a treat like this every time he got detention. Feeling dazed, Harry left. "Oh, thank you, Capri." It was so late that the Gryffindor common room was almost empty. Harry went straight up to the dormitory. Ron wasn't back yet. Harry pulled on his pajamas, got into bed, and waited. Half an hour later, Ron arrived, nursing his right arm and bringing a strong smell of polish into the darkened room. "My muscles have all seized up," he said, groaning and sinking into his bed. 14 times he made me buff up the Quidditch cup before he was satisfied. And then I had another slug attack all over a special award for services to the school. Took ages to shift the slime. How was it with Lockhart? Keeping his voice low so as not to wake Neville, Dean, or Seamus, Harry told Ron exactly what he had heard. "And Lockhart said he couldn't hear it?" said Ron. Harry could see him frowning in the moonlight. "Do you think he was lying? But I don't get it. Even someone invisible would have had to open the door." "I know," said Harry, lying back on his 4-poster and staring at the canopy above. "I don't get it either." Ooh, this is one of my favorite chapters. The next chapter is not in the movie. So, if anybody has not read the Harry Potter books, definitely pay attention to this next chapter. It is not something that shows up in the movie, but it's one of my favorite parts of the entire book. But I need a drink. Actually, I think I need water more than I need whiskey right now, which is saying something. All right. Chapter 8. The Death Day Party. Look at the dead fish. It's not vodka. It's whiskey. That's some dark vodka. All right. October arrived. My favorite month of the entire year. I love October. Sending a damp chill over the grounds and into the castle. Madame Pomfrey, the matron, was kept busy with a sudden spat of colds amongst the staff and students. Her pepper-up potion worked instantly, though it left the drinkers smoking at the ears for several hours afterwards. Ginny Weasley, who had been looking peaky, was bullied into taking some by Percy. The steam poured from under her vivid hair and gave her the impression that her whole head was on fire. Oh, I'm not mixing vodka and whiskey. That's just bad. Raindrops the size of bullets thundered on the castle windows for days on end. The lake rose, the flower beds turned into muddy streams, and Hagrid's pumpkins swelled to the size of garden sheds. Oliver Wood's enthusiasm for regular training sessions, however, was not dampened, which was why Harry was to be found late one stormy Saturday afternoon, a few days before Halloween, returning to Gryffindor Tower, drenched to the skin and splattered with mud. Even aside from the rain and wind, it hadn't been a happy practice session. Fred and George, who had been spying on the Slytherin team, had seen for themselves the speed of those new Nimbus 2001s. They reported that the Slytherin team was no more than 7 greenish blurs shooting through the air like jump jets. As Harry squelched along the deserted corridor, he came across somebody who looked just as preoccupied as he was. Nearly Headless Nick, the ghost of Gryffindor Tower, was staring morosely out the window, muttering under his breath. Didn't fulfill the requirements. Half an inch, if that. Hello, Nick, said Harry. Oh, hello, said Nearly Headless Nick, startled and looking around. He wore a dashing plumed hat on his long curly hair, and a tunic with a ruff, which concealed the fact that his neck was almost completely severed. He was pale as smoke, and Harry could see right through him to the dark sky and torrential rain outside. You look troubled, young Potter, said Nick, folding a transparent letter as he spoke and tucking it inside his doublet. So do you, said Harry. Ah, Nearly Headless Nick waved an elegant hand. A matter of no importance. It's not as though I really wanted to join, though I'd apply, but apparently I don't fulfill the requirements. In spite of his airy tone, there was a look of great bitterness on his face. But you would think that, wouldn't you? He erupted suddenly, pulling the letter back out of his pocket, that getting hit 45 times in the neck with a blunt axe would qualify you to join the Headless Hunt. Yes, said Harry, who was obviously supposed to agree. I mean, nobody wishes more than I do that it had been quick and clean and my head had come off properly. I mean, it would have saved me a great deal of pain and ridicule. However, Nearly Headless Nick shook his letter open and read furiously. We can only accept huntsmen whose heads have been parted completely from their bodies. You will appreciate that it would be impossible otherwise for members to participate in the hunt activities, such as horseback head juggling and head polo. It is with the greatest regret, therefore, that I must inform you that you do not fulfill our requirements. With very best wishes, Sir Patrick Delaney Podmore. Fuming, Nearly Headless Nick stuffed the letter away. Half an inch of skin and sinew holding my neck on, Harry. Most people would think that's good and beheaded, but oh no, that's not enough for Sir Properly Decapitated Podmore. Nearly Headless Nick took several deep breaths and then, in a much calmer tone, So, what's bothering you? Anything I can do? No, said Harry, not unless you know where we can get 7 free Nimbus 2001s for our match against Slytherin. The rest of Harry's sentence was drowned by a high-pitched mewing from somewhere near his ankles. He looked down and found himself gazing into a pair of lamp-like yellow eyes. It was Mrs. Norris, the skeletal grey cat who was used by the caretaker Argus Filch as a sort of deputy in his endless battle against students. "You better get out of here, Harry," said Nick quick. "Filch isn't in a good mood. He's got flu, and some third years accidentally plastered frog brains all over the ceiling in Dungeon 5. He's been cleaning all morning, and if he sees you dripping mud all over the place—" "Right," said Harry, backing away from the accusing stare of Mrs. Norris, but not quickly enough. Drawn to the spot by the mysterious power that seemed to connect him with his foul cat, Argus Filch burst suddenly through the tapestry to Harry's right, wheezing and looking wildly about for the rule breaker. There was a thick tartan scarf bound around his head, and his nose was unusually purple. "Filth!" he shouted, his jowls a-quiver, his eyes popping alarmingly as he pointed at the muddy puddle that was dripping from Harry's Quidditch robes. "Mess and muck everywhere! I've had enough of it, I tell you! Follow me, Potter!" So Harry waved a gloomy goodbye to Nearly Headless Nick and followed Filch back downstairs, doubling the number of muddy footprints on the floor. Harry had never been inside Filch's office before. It was a place most students avoided. The room was dingy and windowless, lit by a single oil lamp dangling from the low ceiling. A faint smell of fried fish lingered about the place. Wooden filing cabinets stood around the walls. From their labels, Harry could see that they contained details of every pupil Filch had ever punished. Fred and George Weasley had an entire drawer to themselves. A highly polished collection of chains and manacles hung on the wall behind Filch's desk. It was common knowledge that he was always begging Dumbledore to let him suspend students by their ankles from the ceiling. Filch grabbed a quill from a pot in his desk and began shuffling around looking for parchment. "Dung," he muttered furiously. "Great sizzling dragon bogies, frog brains, rat intestines, I've had enough of it. Make an example. Where's that form? Yes." He retrieved a large roll of parchment from his desk drawer and stretched it out in front of him, dipping his long black quill into the inkpot. "Name, Harry Potter. Crime—" "It's only a bit of mud," said Harry. "It's only a bit of mud to you, boy, but to me it's an extra hour of scrubbing," shouted Filch, a drip shivering unpleasantly at the end of his bulbous nose. "Crime, befouling the castle. Suggested sentence?" Dabbing at his steaming nose, Filch squinted unpleasantly at Harry, who waited with bated breath for his sentence to fall. But as Filch lowered his quill, there was a great bang on the ceiling of the office, which made the oil lamps rattle. "Peeves!" Filch roared, flinging down his quill in a transport of rage. "I'll have you this time! I'll have you!" And without a backward glance at Harry, Filch ran flat-footed from the office, Mrs. Norris streaking alongside him. Peeves was the school poltergeist, a grinning, airborne menace who lived to cause havoc and distress. Harry didn't much like Peeves, but couldn't help feeling grateful for his timing. However, whatever Peeves had done, and it sounded as though he'd wrecked something very big this time, hopefully that would distract Filch from Harry. Thinking that he should probably wait for Filch to come back, Harry sank into a moth-eaten chair next to the desk. There was only one thing on it apart from his half-completed form. A large, glossy, purple envelope with silver lettering on the front. With a quick glance at the door to check that Filch wasn't on his way back, Harry picked up the envelope and read, "Quick Spell. A correspondence course in beginner's magic." Intrigued, Harry flicked the envelope open and pulled out a sheet of parchment inside. More curly silver writing on the front page. "Feel out of step in the world of modern magic? Find yourself making excuses not to perform simple spells? Ever been taunted for your woeful wand work? There is an answer. Quick Spell is an all-new, fail-safe, quick-result, easy-learn course. Hundreds of witches and wizards have benefited from Quick Spell method. Madame Z. Nettles of Tomshames writes, "I had no memory of incantations, and my potions were a family joke. Now, after a Quick Spell course, I'm the center of attention at parties, and friends beg for the recipe for my scintillation solution. Warlock DJ Prod of Didsbury says, "My wife used to sneer at my feeble charms, but 1 month into your fabulous quick spell course and I succeeded in turning her into a yak. Thank you, quick spell." Fascinated, Harry thumbed through the rest of the envelope's contents. Why on earth did Filch want a quick spell course? Did this mean he wasn't a proper wizard? Harry was just reading Lesson 1, Holding Your Wand, Some Useful Tips, when shuffling footsteps outside told him that Filch was coming back. Stuffing the parchment back into the envelope, Harry threw it back on the desk just as the door opened. Filch looked triumphant. "Ah, that vanishing cabinet was extremely valuable," he was saying gleefully to Mrs. Norris. "We'll have Peeves out this time, my sweet." His eyes fell on Harry, and then darted to the quick spell envelope, which, Harry realized too late, was lying 2 feet away from where it had started. Filch's pasty face went brick red. Harry braced himself for a tidal wave of fury. Filch hobbled across to his desk, snatched up the envelope, and threw it in a drawer. Did you read?" he sputtered. "No," Harry lied quickly. Filch's knobby hands were twisting together. "If I thought you'd read my private... Not that it's mine, for a friend, but that it may, however..." Harry was staring at him, alarmed. Filch had never looked madder. His eyes were popping, a tick was going in one of his pouchy cheeks, and the tartan scarf didn't help. "Very well, go, and don't breathe a word, not that... However, if you didn't read... Go on, I'll have to write up Peeves' report, just go." Amazed at his luck, Harry sped out of the office, up the corridor, and back upstairs. To escape from Filch's office without punishment was probably some kind of school record. Harry, did it work?" Nearly headless Nick came gliding out of a classroom. Behind him, Harry could see the wreckage of a large black and gold cabinet, which appeared to have been dropped from a great height. "I persuaded Peeves to crash it over Filch's office. Thought it might distract him." "Was that you?" said Harry gratefully. "Yeah, it worked. I didn't even get detention. Thanks, Nick." They set off up the corridor together. Nearly headless Nick, Harry noticed, was still holding Sir Patrick's rejection letter. "I wish there was something I could do for you about the headless hunt," Harry said. Nearly headless Nick stopped in his tracks, and Harry walked right through him. He wished he hadn't. It was like stepping through an icy shower. "But there is something you could do for me," said Nick excitedly. "Harry, would it be too much? Oh, but no, you wouldn't want..." "What is it?" said Harry. "Well, this Halloween will be my 500th death day," said Nearly Headless Nick, drawing himself up and looking dignified. "Oh," said Harry, not sure whether he should look happy or sad or sorry. Right. I'm holding a party down in one of the roomier dungeons. Friends will be coming from all over the country. It would be such an honor if you would attend. Mr. Weasley and Miss Granger would be most welcome too, of course. But I dare say you'd rather go to the school feast." He watched Harry on tenterhooks. "No," said Harry quickly. "I'll come." "Oh, my dear boy, Harry Potter at my death day." And he hesitated, looking excited. "Do you think you could possibly mention to Sir Patrick how very frightening and impressive you find me?" "Of course," said Harry. Nearly Headless Nick beamed at him. "A death day party," said Hermione keenly, when Harry had changed at last and joined her and Ron in the common room. "I bet there aren't many living people who can say they've been to one of those. It'll be fascinating." "Why would anyone want to celebrate the day they died?" said Ron, who was halfway through his potions homework and grumpy. "Sounds dead depressing to me." Rain was still lashing the windows, which were now inky black, but inside all looked bright and cheerful. The firelight glowed around the countless squashy armchairs where people sat reading, talking, doing homework, or, in the case of Fred and George Weasley, trying to find out what would happen if you fed a filibuster firework to a salamander. Fred had rescued the brilliant orange fire-dwelling lizard from the care of magical creatures class, and it was now smoldering gently on a table, surrounded by a knot of curious people. Harry was on the point of telling Ron and Hermione about Filch and the quick spell when the salamander suddenly whizzed into the air, emitting loud sparks and bangs as it wheeled wildly around the room. The sight of Percy bellowing himself hoarse at Fred and George, the spectacular display of tangerine stars showering from the salamander's mouth, and its escape into the fire with accompanying explosions, drove both Filch and the quick spell envelope from Harry's mind. By the time Halloween arrived, Harry was regretting his rash promise to go to the Death Day party. The rest of the school were happily anticipating their Halloween feast. The great hall had been decorated with the usual live bats. Hagrid's vast pumpkins had been carved into lanterns large enough for 3 men to sit in, and there were rumors that Dumbledore had booked a troupe of dancing skeletons for entertainment. "A promise is a promise," Hermione reminded Harry bossily. "You said you'd go to the Death Day party." So, at 7 o'clock, Harry, Ron, and Hermione walked straight past the doorway to the packed great hall, which was glittering invitingly with gold plates and candles, and directed their steps instead towards the dungeons. The passageway leading to Nearly Headless Nick's party had been lined with candles too, though the effect was far from cheerful. There were long, thin, jet-black tapers, all burning bright blue, casting a dim, ghostly light even over their own living faces. The temperature dropped with every step they took. As Harry shivered and drew his robes tightly around him, he heard what sounded like 1,000 fingernails scraping an enormous blackboard. "Is that supposed to be music?" Ron whispered. They turned a corner and saw Nearly Headless Nick standing at a doorway hanging with black velvet drapes. "My dear friends," he said mournfully, "welcome, welcome. So pleased you could come." He swept off his plumed hat and bowed them aside. It was an incredible sight. The dungeon was full of hundreds of pearly white translucent people, mostly drifting around a crowded dance floor, waltzing to dreadful, quivering sounds of 30 musical saws played by an orchestra on a black-draped platform. A chandelier overhead blazed midnight blue with 1,000 more black candles. Their breath rose in a mist before them. It was like stepping into a freezer. "Shall we look around?" Harry suggested, wanting to warm up his feet. "Careful not to walk through anyone," said Ron nervously. They set off around the edge of the dance floor. They passed a group of gloomy nuns, a ragged man wearing chains, and the fat friar, a cheerful Hufflepuff ghost, who was talking to a knight with an arrow sticking out of his forehead. Harry wasn't surprised to see that the Bloody Baron, a gaunt, staring Slytherin ghost covered in silver bloodstains, was being given a wide berth by the other ghosts. "Oh no," said Hermione, stopping abruptly. Turn back! I don't want to talk to Moaning Myrtle." "Who?" said Harry, as they backtracked quickly. "Oh, she haunts the girls' toilet on the first floor," said Hermione. "She haunts a toilet?" "Yes, it's been out of order all year because she keeps having tantrums and flooding the place. I never went in there anyway if I could avoid it. It's awful trying to go to the loo with her wailing at you." "Look, food," said Ron. At the end of a dungeon was a long table, also covered in black velvet. They approached it eagerly, but next moment had stopped in their tracks, horrified. The smell was very disgusting. Large, rotten fish were laid on handsome silver platters. Cakes, burned charcoal black, were heaped on salvers. There was a great maggoty haggis, a slab of cheese covered in furry green mold, and, in pride of place, an enormous grey cake in the shape of a tombstone, with tar-like icing forming the words, "Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Poppington, died 31st August, 1492. Harry watched, amazed, as a portly ghost approached the table, crouched low, and walked through it, his mouth held wide so that it passed through one of the stinking salmons. "Can you taste it when you walk through it?" Harry asked him. "Almost," said the ghost sadly, and he drifted away. "I expect they've let it rot to give it a stronger flavor," said Hermione knowledgeably, pinching her nose and leaning closer to look at the putrid haggis. "Can we move? I feel sick," said Ron. They had barely turned around, however, when a little man swooped suddenly from under the table and came to a halt in midair before them. "Hello, Peeves," said Harry cautiously. Unlike the ghosts around them, Peeves the poltergeist was the very reverse of pale and transparent. He was wearing a bright orange party hat, a revolting bow tie, and a broad grin on his face. "Nibbles?" he said sweetly, offering them a bowl of peanuts covered in fungus. "No thanks," said Hermione. "Heard you talking about poor Myrtle," said Peeves, his eyes dancing. "Rude you was about poor Myrtle." He took a deep breath and bellowed, "Oi, Myrtle!" "Oh, no, Peeves, don't tell her what I said. She'll be really upset," Hermione whispered frantically. "I didn't mean it. I don't mind her. Oh, hello, Myrtle." The squat ghost of a girl had glided over. She had the glummest face Harry had ever seen, half hidden behind lank hair and thick, pearly spectacles. "What?" she said sulkily. "How are you, Myrtle?" said Hermione in a falsely bright voice. "It's nice to see you out of the toilet." Myrtle sniffed. "Miss Granger was just talking about you," said Peeves slyly in Myrtle's ear. "Oh, just saying how nice you look tonight," said Hermione, glaring at Peeves. Myrtle eyed Hermione suspiciously. "You're making fun of me," she said, silver tears welling rapidly in her small see-through eyes. You see the Death Day feast? "No, honestly, didn't I just say how nice Myrtle was looking?" said Hermione, nudging Ron and Harry painfully in the ribs. Oh yeah, she did." "Don't lie to me," Myrtle gasped, tears now flooding down her face, while Peeves chuckled happily over his shoulder. Do you think I don't know what people call me behind my back? Fat Myrtle, ugly Myrtle, miserable, moaning, moping Myrtle." "You missed out Spotty," Peeves hissed in her ear. Moaning Myrtle burst into anguished sobs and fled from the dungeon. Peeves shot after her, pelting her with moldy peanuts, yelling, "Spotty! Spotty!" "Oh dear," said Hermione sadly. Nearly Headless Nick now drifted towards them through the crowd. "Enjoying yourselves?" "Oh yes," they lied. "Not a bad turnout," said Nearly Headless Nick proudly. "The Wailing Widow came all the way up from Kent. Oh, it's nearly time for my speech. I'd better go and warn the orchestra." The orchestra, however, stopped playing at that very moment. They and everyone else in the dungeon fell silent, looking around in excitement as a hunting horn sounded. "Oh, here we go," said Nearly Headless Nick bitterly. Through the dungeon walls burst a dozen ghost horses, each ridden by a headless horseman. The assembly clapped wildly. Harry started to clap too, but stopped quickly at the sight of Nick's face. The horses galloped into the middle of the dance floor and halted, rearing and plunging. A large ghost in the front, whose bearded head was held under his arm, blew the horn, leapt down, lifted his head high in the air so he could see all over the crowd — everyone laughed — and strode over to Nearly Headless Nick, squashing his head back onto his neck. "Nick," he roared, "how are ya? Head still hanging in there?" He gave a hearty guffaw and clapped Nearly Headless Nick on the shoulder. "Welcome, Patrick," said Nick stiffly. "Livins!" said Sir Patrick, spotting Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and giving a huge, fake jump of astonishment, so that his head fell off again. The crowd howled with laughter. "Very amusing," Nearly Headless Nick said darkly. "Oh, don't mind Nick," shouted Sir Patrick's head from the floor. "Still upset we won't let him join the hunt. But I mean to say, look at the fellow." "I think," said Harry hurriedly. Oh. What are the angry faces for? For them making fun of Nearly Headless Nick? So mean, big meanies. Nick's very frightening, and, ha, yelled Sir Patrick's head. Bet he asked you to say that. If I could have everyone's attention, it's time for my speech, said nearly headless Nick loudly, striding towards the podium and climbing into an icy blue spotlight. My late lamented lords, ladies, and gentlemen, it is my great sorrow. But nobody heard much more. I'm sorry, Angie, but we're almost done with this chapter. But nobody heard much more. Sir Patrick and the rest of the Headless Hunt had just started a game of head hockey, and the crowd was turning to watch. Nearly Headless Nick tried vainly to recapture his audience, but gave up as Sir Patrick's head went sailing past him to loud cheers. Harry was very cold now, not to mention hungry. I can't stand much more of this, Ron muttered, his teeth chattering as the orchestra ground back into action, and the ghost swept back onto the dance floor. Let's go, Harry agreed. They backed towards the door, nodding and beaming at everyone, who looked at them and a minute later were hurrying back the passageway full of black candles. Pudding might not be finished yet, said Ron hopefully, leading the way back towards the steps of the entrance hall. And then Harry heard it. Rip, tear, kill. It was the same voice, the same cold, murderous voice he had heard in Lockhart's office. He stumbled to a halt, clutching at the stone wall, listening with all his might, looking around, squinting up and down the dimly lit passageway. Harry, what are you... It's that voice again. Shut up for a minute. So hungry for so long. Listen, said Harry urgently, and Ron and Hermione froze, watching him. Kill! Time to kill! The voice was growing fainter. Harry was sure it was moving away, moving upwards. A mixture of fear and excitement gripped him as he stared at the black ceiling. How could it be moving upwards? Was it a phantom to whom stone ceilings didn't matter? This way, he shouted, and he began to run up the stairs into the entrance hall. It was no good hoping to hear anything here. The babble of talk of the Halloween feast was echoing off the great hall. Harry sprinted up the marble staircase to the first floor, Ron and Hermione clattering beside him. Harry, what are you... Shh! Harry strained his ears. Distinctly from the floor above, and growing fainter still, he heard the voice. I smell blood! I smell blood! His stomach lurched. It's going to kill someone, he shouted, and ignoring Ron and Hermione's bewildered voices, he ran up the next flight of stairs 3 at a time, trying to listen over his own pounding footsteps. Harry hurtled around the corner of the second floor, Ron and Hermione panting behind him, not stopping until they turned around the corner into the last deserted passage. Harry, what's all this about? Said Ron, wiping sweat off his face. I can't hear anything. But Hermione gave a sudden gasp, pointing down the corridor. Look! Something was shining on the wall ahead. They approached, slowly, squinting through the darkness. Foot-high words had been daubed on the wall between... Sorry, my mom was calling me. Hang on. Shimmering in the light cast by the flaming torches. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. What's that thing hanging underneath? Said Ron, a slight quiver to his voice. As they edged nearer, Harry almost slipped over. There was a large puddle of water on the floor. Ron and Hermione grabbed him, and they inched towards the passage, eyes fixed on a dark shadow beneath it. All 3 of them realized what it was at once, and leapt backwards with a splash. Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat, was hanging by her tail from the torch bracket. She was stiff as a board, her eyes wide and staring. For a few seconds, they didn't move. And then Ron said, Let's get out of here. Shouldn't we try and help? Harry began awkwardly. Trust me, said Ron. We don't want to be found here. But it was too late. A rumble as though of distant thunder told them that the feast had just ended. From either side of the corridor came the sound of hundreds of feet climbing the stairs, and the loud, happy talk of well-fed people. The next moment, students were crashing into the passage from both ends. The The chatter, the bustle, and the noise died suddenly as the people in front spotted the hanging cat. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood alone in the middle of the corridor. A silence fell among the mass of students pressing forward to see the grisly sight. Then someone shouted through the quiet, "Enemies of the air, beware! You'll be next, Mudbloods!" It was Draco Malfoy. He had pushed to the front of the crowd, his cold eyes alive, his usual bloodless face flushed as he grinned at the sight of the hanging, immobile cat. Okay, here's a tiny little picture here. You have the hanging cat. All right, and that is the end of the Death Day party. So you got to... I like that chapter because it introduces us a little bit more to Nearly Headless Nick, who is actually a really fun character throughout the books. You don't see him much in the movie. You see him, in the first movie. I don't want to give too much stuff away. But that's one of the reasons why I love the Chamber of Secrets so much, is because you're introduced to all sorts of new characters. We've already met Dobby. We're interacting with Nearly Headless Nick a little bit more. We've got a little snippet so far of Moaning Myrtle. We all know her from the movies. All right, I need to go and call my mother back because my mom doesn't usually call me. When she does, it's something important. Maybe she got the hoodie I ordered for her. It's only been like 3 months. All right. Bye, guys. Angie, you can call me in a little bit. I'm going to call my mom first. Night.